呃，我们很高兴啊，有这个时间啊，跟许多朋友啊一起来看一看啊，我平常的这个思考。那因为没有什么时间呢、跟学生或者是家人的谈，那通常都是我自己私下的时候的喜欢读的一些内容啊，那我就把时间先分享出去。那这个是Dr. Lin 的那个思考的世界啊，那我们看看有没有什么可以跟大家一起来分享的。今天的话有一段节目啊，是我自己蛮有兴趣播放的啊。那这个节目呢，是关于呃，这个应该是关于，诶，我看看它是在哪里的。好，是在这个地方啊。这是一个哈佛大学的教授啊，Mike Sandel 啊，他在《影响力100》的一个访问。那实际上我蛮喜欢他的很多的想法，尤其他的那个《Justice》那本书。那我们
好，
来听听
接下来就是学生们跟老师互动的
看他怎么
时间了，因为我
互动。
们知道Michael Sandel 他最有名的部分就是他跟学生之间的互动。所以呢，今天来到这边的9位同学有从台大、政大来的不同的科系哦。哪位同学想要先提问的？Okay, this one will be the first.
Hello, Professor. I'm Edison, and I'm from National Taiwan University. And it was my honor to meet you here. And by the way, I just like your purple tie. It's just stunning. Yeah. And here's my question. You always talk about justice, and what do you think about justice? Is justice a belief or a standard?
Well, that's a question. That's too good a question and too important a question for me to answer in a short answer. The better way to explore it is for us to have a discussion. Should we do that?
Yeah, go ahead. It's your time.
Yes, that's right. It's your time.
All right. Well, let's pull back. Let's begin with a question that isn't about justice as such, but a dilemma, a very practical question. Suppose you're in charge of a school. Some students do well, others not so well. And you want to motivate the students who are not performing well to do better. And an economist comes to you and says, I have a solution. Here is a fund that you can use to pay students cash rewards for getting good grades or for reading books. You can give $50 for an A, $35 for a B. You can pay, if you're teaching young students, each student $2 for each book he reads. How many, now you're the head of the school, how many would be in favor of that policy? Raise your hand.
None of you?
One, Edison would.
Okay.
Who else? Who would be against it? Most are against it. Wow. What would you try it, Luke?
Of course.
Yes,
I
you
would
would.
try it. If money can lead to good destination,
All
why
right.
not?
All right. And Lulu, you're the principal. Would you?
I think I would try a shot.
You would try. So the adults would try it. The students, except for Edison, wouldn't. So let's hear from someone who objects, who would not do it. Why? Who would? And I'll come and see what you think. Why would you be against it? As Lucifer says, it's a way of trying to improve academic performance. And you agree with Lucifer, Edison, right?
It's ultimately good, right? Leads to good things, at least in my standpoint.
Okay. So what's wrong with that, Jeremy?
Well, I think the student should be motivated by their will to knowledge, not motivated by those incentives, such as money.
So is money a lower incentive?
Because the will to knowledge cannot be bought by money.
The will to knowledge. And what does that mean exactly? You're the head of the school. What sort of attitude toward knowledge, toward learning, do you want to cultivate in your students?
Yeah, I want to cultivate the student, but I hope they are self-motivated.
Self-motivated to to learn for the love of learning?
Yeah.
Not for money.
Yeah.
Who else?
Excuse me, Professor.
You want to reply?
Yeah, because I
right.
think I'm not really agree with him, because I think not everyone come from a wealthy family,
right.
and they have to. I don't mean to use the word waste, but they have to waste their time on working on, like in McDonald's, KFC, and they try to use the time to make the money to pay for their school.
And so in your school, you would say, don't work a job.
Yeah, you just study, concentrate, and you'll become more successful on what you should do.
And how much would you pay for each book they read?
How much? I think it depends on what status you may in. Like you in primary school, you in college.
Let's say they're in primary school.
Primary school, I think 50 Taiwan dollars, like $3 will do, I think.
Is that what you would pay?
Well, I think I'll just try to make them with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You know, the trading cards?
Yes.
Yeah, because it will cost less than $15.
You want to save money. You want to save money. But suppose that paying them more will get them to read more books. What would you say?
I think money will be the one thing, but the other that this will be kind of price. It will be kind of honor, you know.
The honor.
Yeah, behind the money.
Yes. And so the money is just a token for the honor.
Yes, it's maybe only a price, and after the price, it may be kind of honor.
But you could give them a certificate to honor them.
Yes, of course.
Without money.
You to exchange for Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
All right.
The money, they can use their money to, do anything they want.
Right. Which makes it more appealing, maybe. And yet almost everyone here disagrees with that. So let's hear some more objections. Jeremy worries that this might be inconsistent with teaching students to learn for the love of learning. What other objections? Alice?
Hello, Professor. Well, I think the main point that we should not allow this kind of measure is that as students, if we get grades, it is a symbol of honor and achievement. And we need to, and as for school leader, they should cultivate character for citizens.
I see.
So if we put the money into non-market norms, then it will lead some problems like corruption.
Corruption.
It sounds like you've already read the book. That's not cheating exactly, is it? And I didn't even have to pay Alice.
Yes, I read the book.
Okay, so cultivating schools are also about cultivating character, you say.
Yeah.
And why would paying students to study be inconsistent with cultivating character? Why might it damage their character?
Just like I'm a law major, and the future career for law school students will be lawyers.
Yeah.
But if we put this kind of too monetary culture into a future lawyer, then it will be a damage to the lawyer society in the future. Everyone will work for money
rather than
work for justice.
Justice.
Okay, so you might, if it's a law student, encourage law students in the future to think their only purpose as lawyers is to make money and not to promote justice.
Well, I think the main goal for a lawyer is to maintain justice of society.
That's interesting. Now, I think Lucifer is something of a skeptic about lawyers.
Well, I think most of the people in Taiwan will be against that lawyers are only aiming for justice. Of course, they can be bought. We are hiring lawyers to do our things to defend us. And, there's a lot of jokes about lawyers. That if you throw lawyers into the ocean, even sharks will not eat them. But I mean, my real question is, what's wrong with cultivating the love for money
rather than the love of learning?
Yes.
What's the answer to that, Alan?
Well, I think that pursuant to several like ancestors' experiences in the royal society,
Yes.
If we have a much more character, then it is easy to attract the following students to your firm.
I see.
Because as a student, we are very concerned about the character of the boss, who we are working for.
Right.
So we are selective. So if a successful boss wants to recruit really elite students, then he or she should cultivate the character.
Okay, so I'm hearing a little bit more idealism from the students, Lucifer, than I am from.
That's why they are students, right?
That's pretty. Is there anyone? Let me ask the students this question. We've been talking about the principal paying students. By the way, in the one school in Texas where they tried paying students to read books, it did lead the students to read more books. It also led the students to read shorter books. A market principle, right? More efficient, a market principle. But I'd be interested in asking the students, how many, let's talk about parents now. Parents paying their children for getting good grades, doing well in school. How many students, when you were paid a gift or given gifts? Raise your hand. Everybody but Francis? Francis? Why? You were deprived, were you? Why did your parents, everybody else's parents paid, yours didn't?
No. She offered the offer that if I achieve some score, she will give me some money. But I think my incentive never relies on that.
Yes.
Because the motivation of reading and of learning, probably because I'm a student and I lived in a pretty good family, so I'm never deprived of
I understand.
anything. So I didn't recognize the importance of having money. So the incentives lies in my motivation of learning and achievement.
Right. Now, the rest of you were paid at one point or another by your parents. When you are parents, are you going to offer money to your children to get good grades? Edison says yes, he will.
Of course, I think that what my father taught me is that money is important, and you want to stay up. My father was a doctor, and you if you want to stay at this luxury life, this warm life, this happy life, then you have to work hard with the right direction. Which when I was a student, I studied. So I think that beside the money part, he told me a most important thing is to look at the bright side.
Timmy.
I think if I were the parents, I will pay my children because I think the concept of giving them allowance is a very great learning for children. They should learn that as well. So if they get good grades on studies, I think they should be rewarded by money.
Good. And who disagrees? Who will not pay his or her children to study or to get good grades? Anyone? Ketty, we haven't heard from you. Will you?
I'm willing to pay my children.
You are willing?
Yes.
But Jeremy, you're not.
I will give my children gifts instead of money.
What kind of gift? All right, here's a question. Will the gift be like candy or a television set, or will it be like gifts like books?
Or a letter wrote by his father?
I will give them something not too expensive, but have the meaning of honor.
So the meaning, not the money, is what you think will matter in the gift.
Because my father is a laborer, and he always tell me that I don't expect you to make a lot of money. I just want you to be a decent guy.
Back to character. This is a wonderful group of students, and what the discussion shows is an important lesson about the debates we need to have in our society about the role of money and markets in seeking the public good. Some point out that a financial incentive might get students to learn more, and Lucifer certainly thinks so. But others, the majority of this group, think that sometimes money and market values, paying kids to read books, may actually erode or corrupt or crowd out other values like the love of learning for its own sake that are higher values than money. This is one small example in the area of teaching and learning about how we really need to think together about whether money and market thinking promotes the goods we seek or may undermine them.
Sure.
Pretty impressive group.
Yes, let's give a big hand to our. They're doing very good.
After that, we'll still have this small.
Yes, we'll still go back to the last part. We'll be asking whether Professor Sender will have new courses open for you. Take a 2 minutes break.
The other plan I have is, now that so many people around the world have seen the justice course, I would like to create a global classroom experiment. And I began to do this last semester, where we create live video linked real-time global classroom with participation from students. It would be we tried it this semester at Harvard, and we had students participating from universities in 4 countries.
很有意思啊。我们就是这样子看看那不同的角度来思考事情，用问题来解答问题。
真的就体验了老师上课的感觉了哈。Professor, your justice course started at 1980 with only 15 students at the beginning, but now there are more than 15,000 students had taken your course already. And through your justice course, what kind of impact do you wish to on your students begin?
Well, what I hope above all is that they learn some philosophy. But really what I hope for is that they become more reflective citizens, that they begin to think for themselves, to question their own assumptions about the meaning of justice and the good society. And in thinking for themselves about these questions, that they will be able to be effective citizens to engage in public discourse of a better kind than the one to which we're accustomed today.
And well, it's very hard to imagine that people were actually expecting a second episode of Justice. So, well, I should ask, do you have any following projects that will open your courses for the millions of viewers out there? People were actually expecting that.
All right. Well, I'm still thinking about it, but the most likely next step would be I might try to do a course or maybe a short course on the subject of the new book about debates about money and markets. The other plan I have is, now that so many people around the world have seen the justice course, I would like to create a global classroom experiment. And I began to do this last semester, where we create live video linked real-time global classroom with participation from students. It would be we tried it this semester at Harvard, and we had students participating from universities in 4 countries around the world. So we had 5 countries represented in different time zones across national and cultural differences, to come together for global discussions about questions of justice and ethics and the role of money and markets in a good society.
Wow, we're looking forward to it.
Maybe next time, including Taiwan too.
It would be great. I would love that.
And at the end of the interview today, we have this gift for you.
Thank you so much.
This is pineapple cake.
Thank you.
That? It's very famous local dessert.
Yes.
Thank you. Wish you have a great time here in Taiwan.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really have enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Share with Kiko.
I will. Thank you.
也谢谢我们今天同学们的参与，感谢各位的收看，我们下礼拜再见，谢谢 ，Thank you。
很有意思啊。我想这个就是这《Justice》这本书啊， 他的这个 writer Michael Sandel，那他是非常有意思，他的课程我第一次看的时候我就觉得很多的这个启发平常我们认为是对的东西常常看起来从不同的角度看，他的感觉不一样那我们也看看他讲的钱买不到的东西，那因为 Justice 这本书我们有看到了，来我们看看，看得到吗？这个是我觉得在整理一些思想的时候，我就觉得也有空的话，我们听听不同的人的角度，就在台大。这个是大阵仗。它的优点就是它很容易用 interactive 互动的方式来。
你好吗？
你好吗？那这个是相当受吸引的。加巴贝。
Thank you for welcoming me here. This is an amazing gathering. This is my first visit to Taiwan.
第一次来台湾这样。
And
这个我想2013
already I feel at home. It is. There are I've been here now just for 3 days, and already I'm grateful for so many things. The subject I teach and write about is philosophy, moral and political philosophy. And often when we think of philosophy, we think of a subject that really resides in the clouds. A subject that is all about abstract ideas that the philosophers discuss and debate, far removed from the world in which we live. But I've never viewed philosophy this way. From the time I was young, I was interested in politics, in campaigns and elections, in political arguments and debates. I found it fascinating. When I graduated from college, how many of you here are still in college, by the way? How many are college students?
Those are college students.
Quite a few. Wow. Well, when I graduated from college, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I thought maybe I would become a political journalist, maybe become a politician and run for office. And the idea of being a professor, that was not my first idea. And then I had a chance to read and study some more and to travel, and I became fascinated by what the philosophers of the past had to say about justice and political community and the common good. And before I knew it, I was captured by the project of philosophy, and I wound up a teacher of philosophy. But I always wanted to retain some connection between the kind of philosophy that I did and the world in which we live. Philosophical problems and debates, especially ethical debates, are difficult and controversial. And the philosophers themselves, whether Plato and Aristotle or Confucius or John Stuart Mill, the philosophers themselves disagree about what justice means, about what a just society looks like. They disagree. They were arguing with one another. And so you might wonder, if these great thinkers can't agree on the meaning of justice and the common good, how can we possibly aspire to do better? And doesn't this show that philosophy is impossible? Well, in a way, it may be. And yet, philosophy is also inescapable, because these big questions about justice and virtue and the common good, these big questions are at stake in our everyday lives, in our personal lives, and also in our public life. And so tonight, I would like to engage you in a discussion. You thought you were coming to a lecture. But it's not the kind of lecture where the professor stands at a podium and reads from a text and gives you the answers about big ideas. Philosophy is exciting because it really is less a list of answers than an invitation to reason together about things that matter in our lives. And so I would like tonight, in this small, intimate gathering, to invite you to discuss some of the big questions that face all of us in our societies. I'm going to give you some examples, some stories that raise hard questions about what is the right thing to do. And I want to invite you to tell me what you think, and to listen to one another, and to say whether you agree or disagree with what your friends and colleagues have to say. So does that sound reasonable?
没有反应啊。
Are you ready to participate? Even you, way back in the balcony. Are you ready?
没有回答。
Yes?
Yes.
All right. The general question I would like to pose is the subject of my new book, What Money Can't Buy. And the question is this: what should be the role of money and markets in a good society? Today, there are very few things that money can't buy. I'll give you one or two examples from my society. There's a city in California that offers prisoners a choice. If you're sentenced to a jail term in this California town, and if you don't like the standard accommodations, you can buy a prison cell upgrade. It's true. For how much do you suppose? How much a night would you guess? It's about $90 a night.
Oh.
A good deal if you can afford it. Here's another example. The cost of living is going up. Jobs are hard to find. There's a new way of making money. Rent space on your forehead to an advertising company. Tattoo advertising, they call it.
Wow.
There are advertising firms that rent space for commercial sponsors on people's foreheads. One woman needed to raise money for the education of her son, and she auctioned off space on her forehead for a permanent tattoo for a commercial sponsor willing to pay, how much do you think? $10,000. Unfortunately, the winning bid came from an online casino. And so she agreed to put an ad, a tattoo ad for the casino on her forehead. What money can buy. Now, these may seem like small examples, but money and markets are reaching in to more fateful, important spheres of life. For example, the way we fight our wars. Did you know that in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, there were more private military contractors on the ground than there were US military troops? Now, this was not because we ever had a public debate about whether we wanted to outsource war to private companies, but this is what has happened. Over the last few decades, we've seen around the world a trend, almost without realizing it. We have drifted from having market economies to becoming market societies. The difference is this: a market economy is a tool. It's a valuable and effective tool for organizing productive activity. And as you all know, market economies have helped produce affluence, prosperity, rising standards of living in places around the world. But a market society is different. A market society is a place where everything is up for sale. A market society is a way of life where market thinking and market values reach into spheres of life previously governed by other values, non-market values. Now, why should we worry about this? For the following reason. When markets operate outside the domain of material goods like cars and flat-screen televisions, when markets begin to dominate other domains of life, family life, personal relations, health, education, criminal justice, civic life, markets govern in those areas. Sometimes they change the meaning of the goods we care about. And sometimes market values can crowd out or corrupt non-market values worth caring about. But it's not easy to know when market thinking and market values pose a threat to other values and when they simply contribute to economic efficiency. But this suggests that where markets serve the public good and where they don't belong, it's not only an economic question. It's also a moral and a civic question, a question on which we often disagree. Despite the fact that we often disagree, we need, I think, to step back and reflect on the proper place of markets. We need to have a morally active debate about where markets serve the public good and where they don't belong. And that's the debate I'd like to invite you to join me in tonight. Let's begin with a small example. Let's imagine that you were living in a place
台
that
湾的，
has
因为他特别为
a
了
lot of
台湾
snow in the winter.
讲慢，
Just imagine
实际
that.
上不需要这样子啊。我给你们看另外一个啊。
The question I would like to put to you is the question at the heart of my Are you ready? Are you ready?
听不到吗？有点奇怪，听不到啊。好像只有那个喇叭的声音啊，听不到那个 video 的声音。我要看清楚到底是怎么回事。有点怪。
The market society is a place where everything is
there is a price tag at almost every aspect of human activity. Market society is a place where money and market values come to dominate every aspect of life. And that, I think, is the direction in which many societies, including my own, and perhaps also here in the discussion, that I think is the direction. So, in writing this book, I wanted to invite and encourage reflection about it.
很奇怪。你看啊，我现在在哪里啊？这声音怪怪的。好，我这边关掉好了。这边关掉，问题就是，好像只能在这一台电脑里面才有办法哈，所以是有点可惜啊。
And suppose there's a store that sells snow shovels to dig out.
好吧，那既然如此哈，今天就不要往这个方向思考了啊，这有一点可惜哦。那个这个部分呢，其实是很有意思的。我们看看这本书吧啊。
Are you ready to join me in this discussion? All right, thank you. One of the challenges democracy faces today is to figure out what should be the role of money and markets in our society. Let's take an example of the free market extended to tickets to events, concerts, rock concerts. Tickets are in high demand, and sometimes there are ticket scalpers who buy and resell tickets. Suppose it's a Lady Gaga concert, and there are scalpers reselling tickets at high prices. Let's take a vote on whether this use of the free market is objectionable. If you think it's all right, raise the white part of your program. If you think ticket scalping for Lady Gaga is wrong, raise the red part of your program.
它的优点是在于它的对象的反应。
We have a good division here too, almost evenly divided. But I think the majority think it's all right to scalp tickets to a Lady Gaga concert. Now, let's take a different example. When I was in China, I learned that outside hospitals in Beijing, there are very long lines of patients, many from the countryside, waiting to see a doctor. And sometimes they have to wait overnight in long lines, sometimes for days, to see a doctor. And at 9 o'clock every morning, the desk opens and the appointment tickets for the doctor's appointments are distributed. They're not expensive, but there are a limited number of them. Ticket scalpers have found a business in the hospital waiting rooms. They hire homeless people and others to wait in the lines to get the appointment tickets, and then they scalp the tickets as if it were a Lady Gaga concert or a World Series game, saying, what will you offer me for a ticket to see the rheumatologist? How many find ticket scalping outside a hospital objectionable, and how many don't? How many see it as the operation of the free market? Raise the white part of your program if you think it's all right. Raise the red program if you think it's objectionable. Ticket scalping for doctor's appointments. Now the vote is very different. Now the majority object, though a minority think it's all right. Let's hear from someone who finds it objectionable to scalp tickets. What would be your reason?
What would be your reason?
Yes, stand up.
I objected to both Lady Gaga and the hospitals because I think it depends on how Lady Gaga thinks and how the hospital thinks, because I would bet that if Lady Gaga knew that her tickets were being sold in auction, and if the doctors were told that the hospital tickets were sold at an auction, they will be very, very disappointed.
Well, would you care? Would you care if you were Lady Gaga? Would you care?
Well, I don't know how it feels like to be Lady Gaga. I would assume that she would want her tickets to be not to be sold at an auction, but be seen by everyone like equally. I think that's
all right. Then let's hear from someone who has no objection to the ticket scalping in either case. Someone who raised the white program for both. Yes.
私はお金で目的が必要だと思うんですよ。病院に行くにもレディー・ガガのコンサートに行くにも、それが本当に必要だとしたらお金はいくらでも後から貯めることができます。それが本当に必要な人ならば、そのお金を貯めるために何でも努力をすると思います。
Right. And who objects? Let me hear now from someone who does not object to scalping tickets to Lady Gaga, but does object to scalping tickets to the hospital, to the doctor's appointment. Yes. Toward the back.
It shouldn't be depends on whether you come from a poor background or richer background.
For the doctor's appointment?
Yes.
What about for the Lady Gaga concert?
I don't think people would like suffer because they cannot get the Lady Gaga ticket. So
some people might suffer. Yes, in the aisle. Yes, stand up.
Lady Gaga concert is entertainment that people can live without it, and if you missed it, there's always next time. But doctor's treatment, it's a human right to have health care. So I think if the person missed it because they don't have money, then they will maybe die. So like, I don't think saving money to see a doctor is not appropriate opinion for this.
And what's your name?
Reika.
Reika, let me ask you about another case. What about scalping tickets to a philosophy lecture?
For this lecture, I would pay because I can.
You don't have to. But you can live without it.
Yeah, but it's for my knowledge. Education.
So is education more like a doctor's appointment or more like entertainment?
Doctor's appointment.
More like a doctor's appointment. I like that.
这个有意思啊。有一点意思啊，就是你现在在思考的就是这个，它是一种哲学，也没有什么正确
Today,
或
I'd
不
like
正
to
确。
turn our attention and get your views about an argument over the role of markets in the realm of human reproduction and procreation. Now, with infertility clinics, people advertise for egg donors. And from time to time in the Harvard Crimson, ads appear for egg donors. Have you seen them? There was one that ran a few years ago. It wasn't looking for just any egg donor. It was an ad that offered a large financial incentive for an egg donor from a woman who was intelligent, athletic, at least 5'10", and with at least 1,400 or above on her SATs. How much do you think the person looking for this egg donor was willing to pay for an egg from a woman of that description? What would you guess? $1,000? 15,000? 10? I'll show you the ad.
Wow, 50,000.
$50,000 for an egg. But only a premium egg. What do you think about that? Well, there are also sometimes ads in the Harvard Crimson and other college newspapers for sperm donors. So the market in reproductive capacities is an equal opportunity market. Well, not exactly equal opportunity. They're not offering $50,000 for sperm. But there is a company, a large commercial sperm bank, that markets sperm. It's called California Cryobank. It's a for-profit company. It imposes exacting standards on the sperm it recruits. And it has offices in Cambridge between Harvard and MIT, and in Palo Alto near Stanford. Cryobank's marketing materials play up the prestigious source of its sperm. Here is from the website of Cryobank, the information. Here they talk about the compensation. Although compensation should not be the only reason for becoming a sperm donor, we are aware of the considerable time and expense involved in being a donor. So do you know what they offer? Donors will be reimbursed $75 per specimen, up to $900 a month if you donate 3 times a week. And then they add, we periodically offer incentives such as movie tickets or gift certificates for the extra time and effort expended by participating donors. It's not easy to be a sperm donor. They accept fewer than 5% of the donors who apply. Their admission criteria are more demanding than Harvard's. The head of the sperm bank said the ideal sperm donor is 6 feet tall with a college degree, brown eyes, blonde hair, and dimples. For the simple reason that these are the traits that the market has shown that customers want. Quote, quoting the head of the sperm bank, if our customers wanted high school dropouts, we would give them high school dropouts. So here are 2 instances, the market in eggs for donation and the market in sperm, that raise a question about whether eggs and sperm should or should not be bought and sold for money. As you ponder that, I want you to consider another case involving market and, in fact, a contract in the human reproductive capacity. And this is the case of commercial surrogate motherhood. And it's a case that wound up in court some years ago. It's the story of Baby M. It began with William and Elizabeth Stern, a professional couple, wanting a baby, but they couldn't have one on their own, at least not without medical risk to Mrs. Stern. They went to an infertility clinic where they met Mary Beth Whitehead, a 29-year-old mother of 2, the wife of a sanitation worker. She had replied to an ad that the center had placed, seeking the service of a surrogate mother. They made a deal. They signed a contract in which William Stern agreed to pay Mary Beth Whitehead a $10,000 fee plus all expenses, in exchange for which Mary Beth Whitehead agreed to be artificially inseminated with William Stern's sperm, to bear the child, and then to give the baby to the Sterns. Well, you probably know how the story unfolded. Mary Beth gave birth and changed her mind. She decided she wanted to keep the baby. The case wound up in court in New Jersey. So let's put aside any legal questions and focus on this issue as a moral question. How many believe that the right thing to do in the Baby M case would have been to uphold the contract, to enforce the contract? And how many think the right thing to do would have been not to enforce that contract? So it's about the majority say enforce. So let's now hear the reasons that people had either for enforcing or refusing to enforce this contract. First, from those, I want to hear from someone in the majority. Why do you uphold the contract? Why do you enforce it? Who can offer a reason?
Who can offer a reason?
Yes. Hand up.
It's a binding contract. All the parties involved knew the terms of the contract before any action was taken. It's a voluntary agreement. The mother knew what she was getting into. All four intelligent adults, regardless of formal education, whatever. So it makes sense that if you know what you're getting into beforehand and you make a promise, you should uphold that promise in the end.
Okay, a deal is a deal, in other words.
Exactly.
And what's your name?
Patrick.
Is Patrick's reason the reason that most of you in the majority favored upholding a contract? Yes? All right, let's hear now someone who would not enforce the contract. What do you say to Patrick? Why not? Yes.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think contracts should be upheld when all the parties know all the information. But in this case, I don't think there's a way a mother, before the child exists, could actually know how she's going to feel about that child. So I don't think the mother actually had all the information. She didn't know the person that was going to be born and didn't know how much she would love that person. So that's my argument.
So you would not, and what's your name?
Evan Wilson.
Evan says he would not uphold the contract because when it was entered into, the surrogate mother couldn't be expected to know in advance how she would feel. So she didn't really have the relevant information when she made that contract. Who else? Who else would not uphold the contract? Yes.
I also think that a contract should generally be upheld, but I think that the child has an inalienable right to its actual mother. And I think that if that mother wants it, then that child should have the right to that mother.
You mean the biological mother, not the adoptive mother?
Right.
And why is that? First of all, tell me your name.
Anna?
Anna, why is that, Anna?
Because I think that that bond that is created by nature is stronger than any bond that is created by, a contract.
Good, thank you. Who else? Yes.
I disagree. I don't think that a child has an inalienable right to her biological mother. I think that adoption and surrogacy are both legitimate trade-offs. And I agree with the point made that it's a voluntary agreement. An individual made it's a voluntary agreement. And you can't apply coercion to this argument.
You can't apply the objection from coercion to this argument.
Correct.
What's your name?
Kathleen.
Kathleen, what do you say to Evan? That though there may not have been, Evan claimed that the consent was tainted, not by coercion, but by lack of adequate information. She couldn't have known the relevant information, namely how she would feel about the child. What do you say to that?
I don't think the emotional content of her feelings plays into this. I think in a case of law, in the justice of this scenario, her change of feelings are not relevant. If I give up my child for adoption and then I decide later on that I really want that child back, too bad. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off that the mother has made.
So a deal is a deal. You agree with Patrick?
I agree with Patrick.
A deal is a deal.
Yes.
Good. Yes.
I would say that, though I'm not really sure if I agree with the idea that the child has a right to their mother, I think the mother definitely has a right to her child. And I also think that there are some areas where market forces shouldn't necessarily penetrate. I think that the whole surrogate mother area smacks a little bit of dealing in human beings, seems dehumanizing, and it doesn't really seem right. So that's my main reason.
And could you tell us your name?
I'm Andrew.
Andrew, what is dehumanizing about buying and selling the right to a child for money? What is dehumanizing about it?
Well, because you're buying someone's biological right. I mean, you can't, in the law, as it's stated, you can't sell your own child. Like, were you to have a child, I believe that the law prohibits you selling it to another person or selling it.
So this is like baby selling.
Right. To a certain extent. I mean, though there is a contract with another person, you've made agreements and whatnot, there is an undeniable emotional bond that takes place between a mother and a child. And it's wrong to simply ignore this because you've written out something contractually.
All right, you want to reply to Andrew? Stay there.
You point out there's an undeniable emotional bond. I feel like we're in this situation, we're not necessarily arguing against adoption or surrogacy in itself. We're just sort of pointing out the emotional differences.
Well, but wait, I mean, it's easy to break everything down to numbers and say, oh, we have contracts like you're buying and selling a car. But there are underlying emotions. I mean, you're dealing with people. I mean, these are not objects to be bought and sold.
All right, what about Andrew's claim that this is like baby selling?
I believe that adoption and surrogacy should be permitted. Whether or not I actually will partake in it is not really relevant, but I think that the government should give its citizens the rights to allow for adoption and surrogacy.
But adoption is not, according to
Is adoption baby selling?
Well, do you think you should be able to bid for a baby that's up for adoption? That's Andrew's challenge.
Do I think I should be able to bid for a baby? I'm not sure. It's a market.
OK， 这很有意思啊，所以这个是很不容易。那个，所以类似这样的 question 啊，常常会 dilemma， 就是两难的问题啊，常常会有这种情况。两难的问题也常常让我们深思到底什么东西是合适什么东西不合适。所以我们可以考虑到某一些层次，但是不一定考虑到全面。但是考虑到了以后，你会怎么样感觉呢？可能要有一个心预备的。我觉得那个 bilingual 的对我来讲很有意思啊。我们来看看 bilingual 的。双语的是。
Today I'd like to turn our attention and get your views.
我看看有没有多一点的双语的。刚好趁这段时间呢，去思考一下这种。论战啊，有双语的吗？电车问题，双语没有什么意思。我要看看代理孕是有一点意思，很短。也没几个了。
This is, of course, about justice, and we begin with a story. Suppose you're the driver of a trolley car, and your trolley car is hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour. And at the end of the track, you notice 5 workers working on the track. You try to stop, but you can't. Your brakes don't work. You feel desperate because you know that if you crash into these 5 workers, they will all die. Let's assume you know that for sure. And so you feel helpless until you notice that there is, off to the right, a side track. And at the end of that track, there's 1 worker working on the track. Your steering wheel works. So you can turn the trolley car, if you want to, onto the side track, killing 1, but sparing the 5. Here's our first question. What's the right thing to do? What would you do? Let's take a poll. How many would turn the trolley car onto the side track? Raise your hands. How many wouldn't? How many would go straight ahead? Keep your hands up, those of you who would go straight ahead. A handful of people would. The vast majority would turn. Let's hear first. Now we need to begin to investigate the reasons why you think it's the right thing to do. Let's begin with those in the majority who would turn to go onto the side track. Why would you do it? What would be your reason? Who's willing to volunteer a reason? Go ahead, stand up.
Because it can't be right to kill 5 people when you can only kill 1 person instead.
It wouldn't be right to kill 5 if you could kill 1 person instead. That's a good reason. That's a good reason. Who else? Does everybody agree with that reason? Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking it's the same reason on 9/11 with regard to people who flew the plane into the Pennsylvania field as heroes because they chose to kill the people in the plane and not kill more people in big buildings.
So the principle there was the same on 9/11. It's a tragic circumstance, but better to kill 1 and so that 5 can live. Is that the reason most of you had, those of you who would turn? Yes? Let's hear now from those in the minority, those who wouldn't turn.
Yes.
Well, I think that's the same type of mentality that justifies genocide and totalitarianism. In order to save one type of race, you wipe out the other.
So what would you do in this case? You would, to avoid the horrors of genocide, you would crash into the five and kill them?
Presumably, yes.
You would?
Yeah.
Okay, who else? That's a brave answer. Thank you. Let's consider another trolley car case and see whether those of you in the majority want to adhere to the principle better that one should die so that five should live. This time, you're not the driver of the trolley car, you're an onlooker. Standing on a bridge overlooking a trolley car track. And down the track comes a trolley car. At the end of the track are five workers. The brakes don't work. The trolley car is about to careen into the five and kill them. And now, you're not the driver. You really feel helpless until you notice, standing next to you, leaning over the bridge, is a very fat man. And you could give him a shout. He would fall over the bridge, onto the track, right in the way of the trolley car. He would die, but he would spare the five. Now, how many would push the fat man over the bridge? Raise your hand. How many wouldn't? Most people wouldn't. Here's the obvious question. What became of the principle? Better to save five lives even if it means sacrificing one. What became of the principle that almost everyone endorsed in the first case? I need to hear from someone who was in the majority in both cases. How you explain the difference between the two? Yes.
The second one, I guess, involves an active choice of pushing the person down, which I guess that person himself would otherwise not have been involved in the situation at all. And so to choose on his behalf, I guess, to involve him in something that he otherwise would have escaped is, I guess, more than what you have in the first case, where the three parties, the driver and the two sets of workers are already, I guess, in the situation.
But the guy working, the one on the track off to the side, he didn't choose to sacrifice his life any more than the fat man did he?
That's true, but he was on the tracks. And
this guy was on the bridge. Go ahead, you can come back if you want. All right, it's a hard question. You did well, you did very well. It's a hard question. Who else can find a way of reconciling the reaction of the majority in these two cases? Yes.
Well, I guess in the first case where you have the one worker and the five, it's choice between those two, and you have to make a certain choice, and people are going to die because of the trolley car, not necessarily because of your direct actions. The trolley car is a runaway thing, and you're making a split-second choice, whereas pushing the fat man over is an actual act of murder on your part. You have control over that, whereas you may not have control over the trolley car. So I think it's a slightly different situation.
All right, who has a reply? Oh, that's good. Who has a way? Who wants to reply? Is that a way out of this?
I don't think that's a very good reason, because you choose to, it's either way you have to choose who dies, because you either choose to turn and kill the person, which is an active conscious thought to turn, or you choose to push the fat man over, which is also an active conscious action. So either way you're making a choice.
Do you want to reply?
Well, I'm not really sure if that's the case. It just still seems kind of different, the act of actually pushing someone over onto the tracks and killing him. You are actually killing him yourself.
You're pushing him with your own hands.
You're pushing him. And that's different than steering something that is going to cause death into another. You know, it doesn't really sound right saying it now.
No, it's good. It's good. What's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew, let me ask you this question, Andrew.
Yes.
Suppose standing on the bridge next to the fat man, I didn't have to push him. Suppose he were standing over a trap door that I could open by turning a steering wheel like that. Would you turn?
For some reason, that still just seems more wrong, right? I mean, maybe if you accidentally leaned into the steering wheel or something like that. But or say that the car is hurtling towards a switch that will drop the trap. Then I could agree with that.
Fair enough. It still seems
wrong in a way that it doesn't seem wrong in the first case to turn, you say.
And in another way, I mean, in the first situation, you're involved directly with the situation. In the second one, you're an onlooker as well.
All right.
So you have the choice of becoming involved or not by pushing the button.
Let's forget for the moment about this case. That's good. Let's imagine a different case. This time you're a doctor in an emergency room, and 6 patients come to you. They've been in a terrible trolley car wreck. 5 of them sustained moderate injuries. 1 is severely injured. You could spend all day caring for the 1 severely injured victim, but in that time, the 5 would die. Or you could look after the 5, restore them to health, but during that time, the 1 severely injured person would die. How many would save the 5? Now is the doctor. How many would save the 1? Very few people, just a handful of people. Same reason, I assume. 1 life versus 5. Now consider another doctor case. This time you're a transplant surgeon, and you have 5 patients, each in desperate need of an organ transplant in order to survive. 1 needs a heart, 1 a lung, 1 a kidney, 1 a liver, and the 5th, a pancreas. And you have no organ donors. You are about to see them die. And then it occurs to you that in the next room, there's a healthy guy who came in for a checkup. And he's, you like that. And he's taking a nap. You could go in very quietly, yank out the 5 organs, that person would die, but you could save the 5. How many would do it? Anyone?
No.
How many? Put your hands up if you would do it. Anyone in the balcony? You would? Be careful, don't lean over too much. What? How many wouldn't? All right, what do you say? Speak up in the balcony, you who would yank out the organs. Why?
I'd actually like to explore a slightly alternate possibility of just taking the 1 of the 5 who needs an organ, who dies first, and using their 4 healthy organs to save the other 4.
That's a pretty good idea. That's a great idea, except for the fact that you just wrecked the philosophical point.
很可爱啊！有钱要多缴税嘛 ？OK， 这些都是很好的问题啊。每一次像这种思辨性的问题啊，我们就是要好好的思考一下。那真正的碰到事情来的时候，你会怎么样做？
Now, we've already heard a number of objections to the libertarian argument. What I would like to do today is to give the libertarians among us a chance to answer the objections that have been raised. And some have already identified themselves and have agreed to come and make the case for libertarianism to reply to the objections that have been raised. So raise your hand if you are among the libertarians who's prepared to stand up for the theory and respond to the objections. You are Alex Harris, who's been a star on the weblog. All right, Alex, come here, stand up, come. Well, we'll create a libertarian corner over here. And who else? Other libertarians who will join? What's your name? John Sheffield. Who else wants to join? Other brave libertarians who are prepared to take on, yes, what's your name? Julia Roto. Julia, come join us over there. Now, while Team Libertarian, Julia, John, Alex, while Team Libertarian is gathering over there, let me just summarize the main objections that I've heard in class and on the website. Objection number 1. And here, I'll come down to, I want to talk to Team Libertarian over here. So objection number 1 is that the poor need the money more. That's an obvious objection. A lot more than do Bill Gates and Michael Jordan. Objection number 2, it's not really slavery to tax, because at least in a democratic society, it's not a slaveholder. It's Congress. It's a democratic, you're smiling, Alex, already. You're confident you can reply to all of these? So taxation by consent of the governed is not coerced. Third, some people have said, don't the successful, like Gates, owe a debt to society for their success that they repay by paying taxes? Who wants to respond to the first one? The poor need the money more. All right, and you're?
John.
John. All right, John, what's the answer? Here, I'll hold it.
All right. The poor need the money more. That's quite obvious. I could use the money. You know, I certainly wouldn't mind if Bill Gates gave me $1 million. I mean, I'd take 1,000. But at some point, you have to understand that the benefits of redistribution of wealth don't justify the initial violation of the property right. If you look at the argument, the poor need the money more, at no point in that argument do you contradict the fact that we've extrapolated from agreed upon principles that people own themselves. We've extrapolated that people have property rights. And so whether or not it would be a good thing or a nice thing, or even a necessary thing for the survival of some people, we don't see that that justifies the violation of the right that we've logically extrapolated.
Good. Okay.
And so that also, I mean, there still exists this institution of like individual philanthropy. Milton Friedman makes this argument.
All right, so Bill Gates can give to charity if he wants to.
Right.
But it would still be wrong to coerce him.
Exactly.
To meet the needs of the poor.
Exactly.
Are the two of you happy with that reply? Anything to add? All right, go ahead, Julie.
I think, Julia, yes. I think I could also add, I guess I could add that there's a difference between needing something and deserving something. I mean, in an ideal society, everyone's needs will be met, but here we're arguing what do we deserve as a society?
And the poor don't deserve the benefits that would flow from taxing Michael Jordan to help them.
Based on what we've come up with here, I don't think you deserve something like that.
All right, let me push you a little bit on that, Julia. The victims of Hurricane Katrina are in desperate need of help. Would you say that they don't deserve help that would come from the federal government through taxation?
Okay, that's a difficult question. I think this is a case where they need help, not deserve it. But I think, again, if you hit a certain level of requirements to reach sustenance, you're going to need help. Like if you don't have food or a place to live, that's a case of need.
So need is one thing and desert is another.
Exactly.
All right. Who would like to reply? Yes.
Going back to the first point that he made about the property rights of the individual, the property rights are established and enforced by the government, which is a democratic government, and we have representatives who enforce those rights. If you live in a society that operates under those rules, then it should be up to the government to decide how those resources that come out through taxation are distributed, because it is through the consent of the government. If you disagree with it, you don't have to live in that society where that operates.
All right, good. So, and tell me your name.
Raul.
Raul is pointing out, actually Raul is invoking point number 2. If the taxation is by the consent of the governed, it's not coerced, it's legitimate. Bill Gates and Michael Jordan are citizens of the United States. They get to vote for Congress. They get to vote their policy convictions, just like everybody else. Who would like to take that one on? John?
Basically, what the libertarians are objecting to in this case is the middle 80% deciding what the top 10% are doing for the bottom 10%.
Wait, John. Majority. Don't you believe in democracy?
Well, right, but
don't you believe in? I mean, you say 80%, 10% majority. Majority rule is what? Majority.
Exactly, but
in a democracy, aren't you for democracy?
Yes, I'm for democracy, but hang on. Democracy and mob rule aren't the same thing. Like,
mob rule.
Exactly.
But in an open society, you have a recourse to address that through your representatives. And if the majority of the consent of those who are governed doesn't agree with you, then you're choosing to live in a society, and you have to operate under what the majority of society concludes.
All right, Alex, on democracy. Democracy. What about that?
The fact that I have won, 500,000th of a vote for one representative in Congress is not the same thing as my having the ability to decide for myself how to use my property rights. I'm a drop in the bucket, and
you might lose the vote.
Exactly.
And they might take,
and I will. I mean, I don't have the decision right now of whether or not to pay taxes. If I don't, I get locked in jail, or they tell me to get out of the country.
But Alex, let me make a small case for democracy. See what you would say. Why can't you? We live in a democratic society with freedom of speech. Why can't you take to the hustings, persuade your fellow citizens that taxation is unjust, and try to get a majority?
I don't think that people should have to convince 280 million others simply in order to exercise their own rights, in order to not have their self-ownership violated. I think people should be able to do that without having to convince 280 million people.
Does that mean you're against democracy as a whole?
I just believe in a very limited form of democracy whereby we have a constitution that severely limits the scope of what decisions can be made democratically.
All right, so you're saying that the democracy is fine, except where fundamental rights are involved. And I think you could win, if you're going on the hustings, let me add one element to the argument you might make. Maybe you could say, put aside the economic debates, taxation. Suppose the individual right to religious liberty were at stake. Then, Alex, you could say on the hustings, surely you would all agree that we shouldn't put the right to individual liberty up to a vote.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why we have constitutional amendments, why we make it so hard to amend our constitution.
So you would say that the right to private property, the right of Michael Jordan to keep all the money he makes, at least to protect it from redistribution, is the same kind of right with the same kind of weight as the right to freedom of speech, the right to religious liberty, rights that should trump what the majority wants.
Absolutely. The reason why we have a right to free speech is because we have a right to own ourselves, to exercise our voice in any way that we choose.
All right, good. All right, so there we, all right, who would like to respond to that argument about democracy being, okay, up there, stand up.
I think comparing religion and economics, it's not the same thing. The reason why Bill Gates was able to make so much money is because we live in an economically and socially stable society. And if the government didn't provide for the poorest 10%, as you say, through taxation, then we would need more money for police to prevent crime. And so either way, like there would be more taxes taken away to provide what you guys call like the necessary things that the government provides.
What's your name?
Anna.
Anna, let me ask you this. Why is the fundamental right to religious liberty different from the right Alex asserts as a fundamental right to private property and to keep what I earn? What's the difference between the two?
Because you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to make money. You wouldn't be able to own property if there wasn't a socially, like if society wasn't stable. And that's completely different from religion. That's like something personal, something that you can practice on your own in your own home. Whereas like me practicing my religion is not going to affect the next person. But if I'm poor and I'm desperate, like I might commit a crime to feed my family, and that can affect others.
Okay, good, thank you. Would it be wrong for someone to steal a loaf of bread to feed his starving family? Is that wrong?
I believe that it is.
Let's take a quick poll of the three of you. You say yes, it is wrong.
It violates property rights, it's wrong.
Even to save a starving family?
I mean, there are definitely other ways around that. And by justifying, no, hang on, before you laugh at me.
很可爱哈 ，Before you laugh at me， 这个是很有意思。
Fulbright Taiwan is celebrating 60 years of educational exchange and has provided scholarships to over 3,000 grantees. I'm William Vokey, the Executive Director of Fulbright Taiwan. Fulbright sends Taiwanese to America and brings Americans to Taiwan. We send scholars both ways to do research and to teach, students both ways to get graduate degrees and do research, and language teachers both ways to teach either Mandarin or English. Fulbright Taiwan has been an intimate part of Taiwan's economic and democratic development, supported by both the U.S. and Taiwan authorities. The vision of Senator Fulbright was a world with a little more knowledge and a little less conflict. He believed that educational exchange would not only enrich our lives with knowledge, but would also lay a foundation of cross-cultural understanding that could be the basis for a more peaceful world. Our keynote speaker today fits perfectly into that vision. Dr. Michael Sandel teaches political philosophy at Harvard, usually describes him as the most relevant living philosopher or a rock star moralist. The New Republic as the most famous teacher of philosophy in the world. Dr. Sandel has done the impossible. He's made political philosophy fun and engaging without losing its nuance or its depth. His legendary course of Justice is the first Harvard MOOC to be freely available online and has been viewed by millions around the world, including in China, where China Newsweek named him the most influential foreign figure of the year. Described by The Guardian as the man who is currently the most effective communicator of English in the world, Sandel's book and lectures have brought him the kind of popularity usually reserved for Hollywood stars and NBA players. It's a great pleasure to be here today with LeBron James. Now, Dr. Michael Sandel.
It's great to be back in Taiwan. Now, the subject I teach is philosophy, moral and political philosophy. There are some people who think that philosophy resides in the heavens, far above the world in which we live. I think philosophy belongs in the city, where citizens gather. Because every time we make a choice about the right thing to do, whether in our public life or in our everyday lives, with our friends and with our families or in business, every time we choose, we presuppose, we commit ourselves to some answer to the kinds of philosophical questions that great thinkers have thought about and written about. Great thinkers going back to Socrates and to Confucius. Now, these days, if you look around the world, there is widespread unhappiness and frustration with the terms of public discourse, with politicians, with established political parties. We see this everywhere. I think one of the reasons for the frustration with public discourse is that we are not very good at reasoning together in public about big questions that matter, including questions about values and ethics. Questions like, what makes for a just society? How should we deal with rising inequality, the growing gap between rich and poor? What do we owe one another as citizens? These are the big questions of values and ethics that people want to think about and reason about and even argue about together. So I think our public life would go better if we overcame the habit of avoiding these questions in public discourse. Now, what might a better kind of public discourse look like? One that addressed more directly the big ethical questions that matter and that people care about. Well, to try to answer this question, I would like to engage with you in a discussion of some ethical questions we face today. Are you willing to join me in that kind of discussion? Yes? All right, now you have two different colored pages, is that right? All right, so you ready? Now, I'm going to put some questions to you, and I want to get your views, and so we'll vote. But more than that, after we vote, I want to hear your reasons, your arguments. Now, I'd like to begin with a question related to justice between generations. I've been reading about the debate going on here in Taiwan about pensions and about the debate about pension reform. And I would like to begin by asking you this question. Consider these two opinions about pensions and pension reform. Opinion one is this: the government should spend less on generous pensions and more on childcare, long-term care, and early childhood education. That's opinion one. Opinion two says even generous pensions that may be expensive represent a promise to an older generation of workers, and that promise should not be broken. So two opinions. How many agree? Raise the yellow page if you agree with opinion one. Government should spend less on pensions and more on childcare, long-term care, and early childhood education. Now, keep the yellow cards up, and if you agree with opinion two, pensions as a promise, raise the gray card. All right, in this audience, all right, thank you for that. In this audience, it looks like there are more people who agree with opinion 1 about pensions. So let's begin with those of you who voted for opinion 1. And who will begin our discussion by offering us a reason, an argument in favor of the idea that the government should spend less on pensions and more on these other policies. First tell us your name and then tell us why you voted the way you did.
My name is Megan Ferguson, and I voted as I did, partially because I think there's a lot of evidence that supports the idea that the earlier children get education and the longer term their care is, the more they will likely make in their lifetime. And the more a person makes in their lifetime, the more there is available for pensions, even if the percentage that we use for pensions stays the same in the long run or is even cut, so that we can spend those funds on other things like this care. So I think overall, by focusing in the short term on turning to care and turning to childhood, we'll be more likely to provide for our elders in the long run.
Okay, thank you for that. So Megan makes a long-term argument about what will actually generate funds to grow the size of the economic pie. Let's hear from someone now who disagrees, someone who voted for the opinion that a pension, even what may seem like an overly generous pension, represents a promise to a previous generation of workers. Who will give us his or her reason? Down here.
Dr. Sandel, my name is Akira, and my argument is actually simple. I don't think this paying for too much is very fair, but if I can trust the government on this, that they will keep their promise, then I can trust them on anything else.
So a promise is a promise.
Yes, indeed.
And there are some people who are agreeing with you. Over here, I can tell. And tell me your name again.
My name is Akira, A-K-I-R-A.
Yeah. Akira. All right, Akira, keep the microphone for the moment. And let's hear from someone who disagrees with Akira. Stand up. Now, wait, tell us your name, first of all.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Dr. Sandel. My name is Jane Wong.
Jane?
Yes.
All right, speak directly to Akira, Jane. And you heard his argument. A promise is a promise. It's a basis of trust. What do you say to that?
Well, actually, I would like to disagree with both and actually agree with both in the sense that I think both are important. However, if we remain on only one side, and there's no side that's going to win in the end. And so I propose a third way. It has to be a third way, which is that, for example, you keep your promise. What the elderly need is to have their needs met and to feel secure in their golden years, right? And so it may not take the form of a generous pension anymore, but you can break down what their needs are. For example, they need company, they need care, but maybe you can create a different kind of institution. For example, I heard an idea, I don't know if it exists yet, where you can combine nurseries with elderly care. And you create what essentially villages used to do, which is a multi-generational kind of place where everyone can interact and have their needs met, so that you would have childhood education and early childhood care along with wisdom from the elderly, and then they would be able to accompany the elderly, and you can spend your money together that way.
All right, so you're looking for an alternative, Jane. You aren't, if you don't mind my asking, you're not by any chance considering a career in politics, are you?
I am currently working on something I would love to share one day with Fulbrighters, but
all right. But
not politics.
Not politics.
But includes politics.
But now I want to. But Akira, I watched Akira listening to what she said, and it sounds like, as far as the expectation of retirees who say they were promised let's be specific, the 18% annual payout of the lump sum they had accumulated prior to 1995, I believe. Now, for them, Jane's alternative proposal might not be, they might not consider that keeping the promise, though. Do you agree with that?
I log about it, but yes, they could. Well, we could address their concern.
What would you say, Akira?
Actually, I think I agree with the expectation thing, because I believe that the government did not give them 18% for nothing. So they must have sacrificed something, or the government must have promised them because they done something at first. So when they done the sacrifice, they expect to get something back. And now you're taking that away from them is taking the trust of our government away, because now I can no longer be sure that when the government promises me that, okay, you do this first now and I will pay you back someday, right, I can no longer trust you.
All right, so Akira sticks by the moral weight of a promise bound up with trust. Who can address that argument directly? Someone who disagrees with Akira, but who has an argument, a reply to this very strong claim about a promise and trust. Raise your hand if you have a reply. Yes, what do you think?
I'll use English for now,
Okay.
sorry. I'm Emily. And I just kind of want to respond and qualify that. So you say that a promise is a promise, but you also have to take into consideration the context and the time at which the promise was made. Because now this is years and years later that these pensions are actually being paid back. So you have to consider that the circumstances under which the promise was made may have changed over that time. So that doesn't mean that the significance of the promise is any less, but it might be necessary to sort of alter some of the numbers in order to better echo the circumstances as they are.
Quick reply. What do you say?
I believe that's not the person that's not the thing that I need to think about. It's the person who gave me the promise that needs to think about before giving me the promise.
All right. So if you came to me and said you wanted to borrow $100 and you promised to pay it back, and then you promised to pay it back next month, and next month you came and said, well, my circumstances have changed. You would still consider that you owe me the money, yes?
Yes.
What about that?
Well, I think we're also looking at a different time span here. So we're talking about years that have passed, not just a month, but years that have passed
what's
between.
What's changed that's relevant here? I suppose, just to put a challenge to Akira, well, the number of workers who are working compared to the number of people who have retired, that's changed dramatically. Today, even about a decade ago, there were 9 workers for every retiree. And today there are 6. And with a low birth rate and expanding longevity, people living longer, there are fewer and fewer workers today for every retiree. The ratio is shrinking. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't think if what I'm going to say is politically correct, but to be honest, those people who were promised to give this amount of money, they won't live for forever. They will eventually pass away, and then this thing will be end for good. So the government has to keep its promise, because it's not like it will go on forever and it will just make our nation down. It won't. It will last like for 30 years.
All right, so Akira is sticking very strongly to his argument. Is there someone who in the course of this discussion has begun to change his or her mind or rethink the position with which he began? Is there anyone yet who is beginning to? Yes, you are? What's your name?
Just call me Raymond. So I originally agree with Akira about the position of the promise is a promise, and I think that the government should stick to this promise. Part of it is because not only the government shouldn't be compared to a person, since the government's promise is on a larger scale and with a more heavier ethical heaviness. Yes, so I think it should be preserved. But right now, I think that it's because the government shouldn't be compared to an individual, so we shouldn't consider them with the practical view of personal credit.
Right. All right. It's a very interesting suggestion. And you've begun to change your thinking. First, you accepted the model, the image, the metaphor of an individual promise, Akira to me, for the $100. But as you've thought about it, you've begun to wonder whether a collective promise made by a government or a large political community may be somewhat different from a promise that one person makes to another person. Is that right?
Yes, indeed.
All right. So, and it raises a very interesting philosophical question about the extent to which a government or a political community at a particular historical moment can make a promise or undertake a commitment that morally binds future generations. It's very interesting. And to explore that question, we would have to explore the very interesting philosophical question of whether moral commitments and moral responsibilities, to what extent must they be individual, and to what extent can they be collective and extended across time? I can commit myself to repay Akira $100 next month, but can a political community or can a generation make a commitment that binds future generations? Maybe so. But then the question arises, well, just how many future generations? The next generation? What about the one after that? What about a generation 100 years from now? So this is a very interesting suggestion, and you're now trying to figure out what you think about the original question.
Okay,
You're
I
wondering.
think we should consider that the government and its society is a collective entity, and it is considered politically continuous.
Yeah, very.
Yet, so the individual, which compares the society, is continually changing.
Okay, very good.
To a certain extent, you would say that the two society in different time points are similar and different.
Right. It's very interesting too, because it raises questions, sometimes very difficult, fraught, controversial questions, about the moral responsibility of one generation to redress wrongs that may have been committed by their grandparents' generation. And that too raises questions about whether moral responsibility can reach across time, whether it can be collective as well as individual, and to what extent do we bear the burdens of moral responsibility for acts our great-grandparents' generation may have committed. I want to thank everyone who's joined in this first round of discussion on tensions. What we already see is, beginning with a discussion of a very concrete policy question, leads us to some very interesting and important broader philosophical questions. I'd like to shift to a different kind of example, but also a contemporary political and policy question: the use of nuclear power. Now, the Taiwan government has recently announced it's going to transition away from reliance on nuclear power. How many think that's a good idea? How many people are in favor of Taiwan not relying, beginning in the near future, on nuclear power? Raise yellow if you want to transition away. Raise gray if you think Taiwan should continue nuclear power. Here I see quite a mix, more of an even divide. I see a lot of people want to get rid of nuclear power, but about an equal number want to continue with it. Now, here's a related question, a question related to nuclear power that I would like to ask you. Let's suppose that for the moment, given the use of nuclear power, there's a need to store the waste somewhere, the radioactive waste. And much of that waste, in the case of Taiwan, as I understand it, is stored on Orchard Island, is that right? Orchid Island? And the people on Orchid Island are not very happy about having more and more nuclear waste stored there. And so the question arises what to do with it. Now, here's one possible solution I would like to get your reaction to. Suppose there's a country, maybe a poor country somewhere in the world, maybe a number of such countries, who are looking for ways to make money. And suppose countries, including Taiwan, that want to store their nuclear waste somewhere else, enter into a deal with, say, a poor country in Africa. We'll ship you our nuclear waste to store, and we will pay you a good amount of money to accept it. And suppose there are countries willing to accept this deal, to accept monetary payment to store Taiwan's nuclear waste. How many people think this would be a good idea, and how many people find it morally objectionable? How many people think it's wrong? If you think it's a good idea, raise the yellow card. If you think it's morally objectionable, raise the gray card. The majority, a mixed opinion, the majority seem to find it objectionable. Let's hear from someone who's raised the gray card. Why is it objectionable? What's wrong? If both countries agree, what's wrong with it? Who will begin our discussion of nuclear waste disposal for pay, outsourcing, so to speak, nuclear waste storage? Yes, stand up and tell us your name.
Hello, my name is Emily. The question I want to kind of ask in response is, who is truly making that decision? In the poor country that the nuclear waste would be sent to, is the decision being made by presumably wealthy, well-advantaged politicians, where I would not hesitate to say the waste will not be stored in their backyard?
Right.
Or is that decision made as a country as a whole? So that's kind of where
That would make a difference. You suspect it will be elites who will make those decisions.
Aren't most decisions made that way?
In developing countries, and that they won't bear the burden of their choice.
Yes, and even if they do, once again, money pays for healthcare. So if there were health consequences, they would not be as consequential.
Would your opinion, and what's your name?
Emily?
Emily, would your opinion differ? You said that these are probably not going to be democratically made decisions, but suppose that they were, then would that remove your objection?
That would remove that specific objection. I think I have other ones, but that was my primary one.
All right, let's see. Let's see if there are others who have objections. We have one objection from Emily that she doubts that these decisions will be democratically made. They'll be made by elites. But suppose for the sake of argument, just to test the principle, that it would be democratically made in the developing country. Does someone have a further objection? Let's hear from someone who favors the idea of paying the country way back in the corner. Stand up. Paying other countries that are willing to accept the waste. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Anita, and I think that this is a typical way how to deal with externalities from economical point of view. And let's say this country is really poor. They don't have enough money for schools, for infrastructure. So for storing this waste, they can maybe use this money for building new infrastructure, for improving healthcare, for improving life standard. So why not to use it? Because maybe there will be new scientists who will come from this country, who will in the end find a way how to work with this nuclear power and with this waste, and who will find a solution. So why not to improve a living standard in the country, if we can?
Good, and Anita, you mentioned this is a classic way of dealing with what you call an externality. You aren't by any chance an economist?
Yeah, I have an economist background.
I see. All right, so Anita has provided a strong economic argument in favor of doing this. The country that receives the money can use that money to improve the lives of their people. And let's assume they do. It's true that elites might use it, might squander it on palaces or private jets. But let's suppose it's democratically decided, and suppose the money is used, as Anita suggests, to improve the lives of the people. Who disagrees with Anita and has a reply? And I want to say again, if you want to speak in Chinese, feel free in whatever language you prefer. Who has a reply to Anita? Yes.
Hi, my name is Tanya. 我觉得这是今天好，我们比如说以前可能欧美比较强，他们把他们的废物放到台湾来，然后台湾今天可能放到非洲去。那好，那如果今天全部人都提升起来了，就是连非洲也开始发展他们的工业，也开始有核废料，那这些垃圾要往哪边放？放到南极、北极去吗？那南极、北极住的是什么？北极熊，然后海豹之类的吗？我们要付钱给他们吗？他们要付钱，我们的钱干嘛呢？所以那就是一个垃圾，它就是存在。但是我自己也觉得很矛盾，因为我刚刚是支持台湾继续有那个核能的，因为我觉得如果台湾持续不发展那个经济的话，会越来越衰败。
I don't know if the polar bears have elites who dominate the other polar bears, but let me hear, thank you for that. Let me hear another objection. Is there any further answer to Anita's argument that the country that accepts the nuclear waste for money should be able to make that decision? Both countries are better off. Taiwan is better off, finds a place to keep the waste. The poor country is better off because it makes money that will go to the benefit, we're assuming, will go to the benefit of their people, for health, for education, for improvement. Who has an answer to that argument? Yes.
Hi, my name is Yuchi. My response is basically that that's very idealistic. If perhaps in the short term, we can provide, the African country can provide better schools and better healthcare, but then afterwards they're gonna pay for the healthcare, right? All those side effects and whatnot. So in the end, they're gonna end up paying more money for actually nothing, right? So maybe 10 years of kids will benefit.
Decision. Sure. And so the policy is, all right, you think it's wrong to outsource to an African country, we'll give a financial payment to communities domestically here in order to compensate them. Do you like that idea, in principle, better than the outsourcing?
Well, I was more so responding to this idealistic kind of
what do
view.
you think? Faced with those two choices, which would you prefer?
I don't like either of those choices. Why don't we go back to the original choice where Taiwan's cutting the...
So you get rid of nuclear power altogether?
I mean, I would defer to Emily over here.
Right, so you want to get rid of it altogether. But while it exists, is there anything, what do you say? Go ahead.
What I wanted to say was, well, my opinion in general about two people who make agreement and are informed when they're making that agreement is that people who are outside of those two, people's countries who are making that agreement should respect that respect that they've made that choice. They bought that risk. Just like when Taiwan is creating nuclear waste, there is a risk that no one will buy that nuclear waste and they will have to sit with it.
Right.
And it might cause health,
Right.
health issues. And just like an African country who decides to buy the nuclear waste, if they made that decision being well informed, they are paying for that. They're getting that money and they are receiving that risk. That is the cost.
Right.
Money.
So if both sides are well informed,
Yes.
including the country that buys the risk, they understand what the risk is, whether they're buying it domestically in a particular community or in Africa.
Yeah.
So long as they're informed and they come to an agreement, a deal is a deal. It's a voluntary exchange.
Yeah.
And so nobody should criticize it.
Yeah.
What is your name?
My name, Lena.
Lena?
Mhm.
All right. Do you disagree with Lena? All right. All right. Stand up and tell us why.
Hi, my name is Destiny. I don't have that much to say, but I think that you have to take into consideration that the other country is probably underprivileged, very poor. And so I want to compare this situation to, say, somebody who's starving on the streets and working in the sex industry. Like, is that really their choice to sell their, they know what they're doing, they're informed.
Right.
But they're hungry.
Yep.
So what's the lesser of the two evils?
Okay, great. Let's go back and let Lena reply.
Then that's the prostitutes. If they're, this is like the example you gave was that it was a democratic decision. The whole country made that decision to take in the waste.
Yeah.
So if let's just put that example to the prostitute, if they did it out of out of necessity, shouldn't it be them who decides whether they want food or not, and how they decide to get that food?
All right, but then let me take, you used an interesting word just now.
Yeah.
If you're following the analogy, the challenge, Destiny's challenge to the voluntary deal. You said, suppose the prostitute does it out of necessity.
Yeah.
Now, is a choice made out of necessity or extreme poverty, is that truly a choice? That's Destiny's challenge, right? Yeah. Well, Destiny says it's not a real choice. What do you say?
It's not a real choice, but if I think that unless the person outside of you who is making that forced decision, unless someone is willing to give you that food, give you that money, then I don't think they should be a part of that. Do you know what I mean? If Destiny says you shouldn't do that, then Destiny should if Destiny can help. I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
No, but wait a minute. So you accept the force of Destiny's analogy to prostitution.
Yes.
And you say, even in the case of a prostitute who's very poor, the prostitute makes a kind of choice, even under necessity, and that should be permitted.
I think it's I'm not saying prostitution is like you should do it. Okay, I'm not promoting it. Okay, I'm just putting that out there.
But it's permissible. It's morally permissible if it's.
I don't think I should judge them. Is what I'm saying. I don't think I should judge them for the decision that they've made.
Okay. Now, what's interesting, thank you for that. Thank you for everyone who's joined in this discussion of the nuclear waste outsourcing. A couple of observations. First, you notice how this argument unfolded. We began with a collective policy question. One country selling its nuclear waste to another country, a poor country. And as we began to think about the moral arguments for and against this transaction, we found ourselves drawn to an individual example, just as we did in the earlier case, the case about the promise. We found ourselves testing a policy choice, a collective decision by analogy to an individual choice, borrowing $100, promising to repay next month. And then the suggestion, but how good is that analogy? An analogy between what a country does or a political community does and what an individual may do. And here in the discussion of outsourcing nuclear waste, we found ourselves in a discussion of what really is a free choice, what is a voluntary deal. And there too, the argument by analogy invoked an individual choice by a prostitute, whether or not to sell her body or his body. And the second interesting feature of the way this argument unfolded was it became an argument about how much necessity, how much desperation is consistent with a voluntary transaction. Just how poor is the country that is agreeing to take the nuclear waste for pay? How free is the choice? It's related to, I suppose, to the worry about elites rather than a democratically decided choice. How free, really, how voluntary is the choice? And if necessity or desperation is lying in the background of the choice, does that undermine the initial thought that a voluntary exchange is a mutually beneficial deal, as economic reasoning introduced by Anita suggests? A deal is a deal, both parties do a deal, make a choice about what's in their interest, and it's not for some third party, some outside observer to judge. That was one argument. And the counter argument was, but if an outside observer or anyone can determine that there was necessity or coercion or desperation, maybe the market logic, the logic of the voluntary deal, is called into question or should be called into question. I'd like to take a third case of an issue that's been debated recently in Taiwan, same-sex marriage. You know that the highest court has ruled that prohibiting same-sex marriage is a violation of the equality embedded in the Taiwan Constitution. I'm trying to tread delicately here. And some people left it to the legislature to figure out how to change the law to make it consistent with equality. They've given the legislature 2 years to do this. There are some people who are in favor of same-sex marriage, of the law recognizing same-sex marriage. There are other people who are opposed. So let's see what people in this room think. If you are in favor of the law recognizing same-sex marriage, raise the yellow. And if you are against, raise the gray. Well, I see a sea of yellow with only a small handful of gray signs. So let's hear first, since there's a small minority who raised the gray sign. I want to begin with the minority and have someone, see if there's someone who will share his or her view against the law instituting same-sex marriage. Will someone begin our discussion? Someone who is against the law recognizing same-sex marriage. Is there some brave person? Because if you don't present the argument, I'll have to present it.
Hi, I'm James. I think that marriage, as we know it, is a very particular, specific way in which we can experience intimacy, mostly two monogamous people who share property together. And I think that the institution of marriage provides a lot of social and legal benefits to a couple. And in so doing, it necessarily doesn't provide those to a lot of other people who have different ways of experiencing intimacy that isn't very specifically monogamous, land sharing type of relationship.
But the issue here is not monogamy. It's
right.
It's the opposite sex can marry.
Right.
So only the opposite sex can marry.
I think that in extending the institution of marriage, we normalize that these benefits should only be extended to people who want to participate in marriage, whereas the only benefit, legal benefit that really is particular to marriage is the right to divorce.
But how is that different in the case of same-sex couples? They want to get married. The element of intimacy is present. The element of monogamy can be as present in same-sex unions as opposite-sex unions. So what's the possibly relevant moral difference that you have in mind?
The difference that what I have in mind is that in extending the right to marriage, we seem to be agreeing as a society that these benefits should be only given to people who want to participate in the institution of marriage.
Right.
And in so doing, we discriminate against everyone who doesn't participate or doesn't want to participate in the institution of marriage. And by extending it to same-sex couples, we normalize that difference, or we say that that is something that should exist.
All right, so you're saying it's an implicit endorsement for the law to recognize same-sex marriage is implicitly to endorse same-sex intimacy.
No, it's explicitly to endorse that, to endorse the rights associated with marriage should only be associated with marriage. But the rights to the tax rights, the rights to visitation, all these rights.
Right, but the question is who should have access to those rights? Yeah.
I'm just listening and I'm hearing you say, and tell me if I'm wrong, that your argument against extending marriage rights to gay couples would be that it is imposing or reinforcing heteronormative norms on the gay community. Okay, that's what I was hearing.
Okay, thank you for that.
I was helping clarify. That is not my position.
No, I understand. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. So it might be a kind of moral imperialism, imposing heteronormativity on same-sex couples. All right, so that's one possible objection. You also have an objection.
So I think when it comes to these questions, I want to make sure we're asking the right questions. I think my opinion is not about this is right or wrong. There's nothing right or wrong to the same-sex marriage, but whether or not Taiwan is ready for these institutions. So Taiwan is more like a Confucius community, even though it's democratic institutionalized. But it's still, we have this more like collectivist behavior in Taiwan where families value, family norms comes before individual norms, individual values. So I really need to be careful myself when I think about this question. Is it's okay, like to me, there are outliers in biodiversity. We see differences. One's in 10,000s, one in 100,000s that we see a gay or lesbian. But what if this happened in your family, especially to those in a traditional Taiwanese family? Could people actually accept it? Are we really ready for this kind of norm embedding in our society?
And what do you think?
Well, I think we're not ready for that, for sure. It'll probably still take a decade or 2 decades to get there.
Okay, over here.
My name is Jose. I'm from Honduras and I'm a lawyer back home. We just had this discussion. And I come from a country that we tend to think a lot about God and religious aspects of this kind of discussions. But I'll try to get my comment in a really professional, scientific way from my point of view in the law. And in the law, it's meant to be followed by everyone, right? But if we don't cover those kind of people, are they allowed to not follow the rest of the law?
So you think that from the standpoint of the universality of the rule of law, it's important that the institution of marriage as a legal institution be open to same-sex couples as well as everyone. To everyone, because you think that's part of, that encourages respect for law as such. And you think it would be unjust discrimination, do you, to exclude same-sex couples from the legal institution of marriage?
I agree.
You think so? And what do you say to the argument, I didn't hear your name.
Jason.
Jason's argument that Taiwan is not ready for same-sex marriage. And Jason also made the point that the Confucian tradition of the family is in some tension. Tell me if I'm recalling correctly, with the idea of same-sex marriage. Do I have that right?
Yes.
What do you say to that argument?
Well,
that's not that's not strictly about the rule of law. That's about whether.
But I'm going to tell you something. This kind of things are happening, either you like it or not. I mean, I don't like it, and I don't have a family member that's in that situation. But I respect it. I respect it. And since it's happening, it's like murder. You don't like murder, do you? But we have to oversee it. We have to have some sort of control about that.
Wow. Well, all right. So let me see if I understand. Now we've been noticing various arguments by analogy. This is quite a dramatic argument by analogy. If I understand what you're saying, what's your name again, Jose?
Jose.
Jose, you are saying, if I understand you, that you favor legal recognition of same-sex marriage. You regard it yourself as morally objectionable, like murder even, but since murder happens,
I don't regard myself in opposition of it. I just don't have the experience about it.
But you're saying that murder is a fact, we better learn to live with it. And likewise, same-sex unions are a matter of fact, we better learn to live with it. Yeah, that's what I would call a not very robust defense of same-sex marriage. But all right, fair enough. I want to see now, we've heard a few objections. Would someone else like to add another objection beyond the ones that we've heard? Objection to same-sex marriage. Is there anyone who hasn't yet spoken? An objection to same-sex marriage? Yes, go ahead.
我觉得就我对法律的理解，过去我们都认为说法律之所以有别于道德跟伦理，是因为法律的执行是由警察，然后由法院来执行法律。像譬如谋杀，为什么需要有法律？是因为当你违反的时候，国家的力量介入来惩罚这个危害社会秩序的行为。 那我自己的疑问是，或者是我不太理解的，就是为什么我们会需要当我们说我们尊重每一个人选择的时候，我们要把它变成是我们国家的法律，所以我就不是很赞成那个同性婚姻要列入在我们台湾的法律里。
I see. So Helen is saying she doesn't agree with same-sex marriage being legalized because the law requires us to do certain things. But marriage, people can get married on their own without having to bring the law into it. Yes, I've got it now. All right. But Helen, what I still don't quite understand, on your view, same-sex couples should be able to get married privately, but should they enjoy by all of the privileges that the law confers upon people who are engaged in a traditional marriage? The law enters in deciding certain tax implications, certain benefits for married couples. The law does enter marriage in those respects. If you're suggesting that same-sex marriage can be done privately without legal endorsement or sanction, what about all of the privileges that the law, that the society confers on couples who are married in the traditional way? Should same-sex couples enjoy all of those privileges, do you think?
我不知道，就是因为现在我对这个议题没有特别的了解，就是我的意思是说，对专法跟民法这中间的差异，就是台湾好像还没有专法来保障同性恋的同性婚姻，然后我们就直接要去修跟所有人有关系的法律，这个跟 Jason 的看法有一点点接近，就是会觉得好像我们还没有在那个步骤上，好像一下跳太多了。
Okay. All right. And you had an objection also that you wanted. All right. Do you want to tell us?
Okay, I think marriage is a private contract of two individuals and therefore should be effective even without governmental supervision and agreement.
So, well, all right. This in a way connects to what I thought I heard Helen say, that marriage is a private arrangement. It's an agreement between two persons. And if that's the case, the law should not endorse or affirm this couple's marriage or that couple's marriage. Is that?
Yes, and I think that should apply to traditional marriage as well.
And so you think that the state should not endorse or recognize anybody's marriage? No, wait.
Yes.
Yeah, that is what. See, I thought that's what he was saying. And tell me your name again.
Oh, Raymond.
Raymond?
Yes.
Okay, so Raymond raises actually a third alternative. The traditional debate, and we see this in Taiwan and we see this around the world, the traditional debate is between those who want the state to endorse same-sex marriage and those who want the state to endorse only marriage between a man and a woman. But Raymond's suggestion, and this has arisen at the edges of debates around the world, is why should the state endorse or recognize or affirm any particular kind of marriage? Maybe the state should get out of the business of conferring recognition on marriage at all and allow all marriage to be a kind of private arrangement, perhaps within religious communities for those who follow the certain religious traditions, perhaps outside of religious communities for those who want to get married that way. One way of describing Raymond's third alternative to same-sex or traditional marriage is to say that marriage should be, so to speak, privatized, no longer recognized by the state. Now, lying behind this idea, well, is, I suppose, the impulse to get around the intense moral controversy that arises when societies debate what the laws of marriage should be. And also underlying this suggestion may be a philosophical idea that says the role of the state should not be to pass moral judgment, to honor and recognize this or that way of forming a family. The role of the state should be neutral with respect to the choices individuals make. So this would be, I suppose, the underlying moral idea of Raymond's proposal, if I understand it correctly. is that a more thoroughgoing, consistent, liberal philosophy of the state would have the state try to be neutral with respect to controversial judgments about how to form families, about what sorts of unions between persons and intimacies are morally legitimate or not. Now, to explore this, what's interesting is that the mainstream debate about marriage and about same-sex marriage is between those who want to claim the recognition and affirmation of the political community as a whole. It's between those who see marriage as a public, not a purely private activity. So in order to evaluate the privatizing proposal of Raymond as a way of dealing with marriage, we would have to think through together the larger philosophical question of whether it is part of the role of the state or the political community to confer honor and recognition on certain ways of life, including certain forms of family life, or whether a just society is one in which the state is non-judgmental. I'd like to put to you a different kind of case. It's about new technology and about the growing role of technology in our lives. Now, some of you may have watched movies on Netflix. Yes? And have you seen how after you watch a certain number of movies, they recommend to you, based on your previous choices, the movies they think you will like? Have you followed those recommendations? And are they usually right? Or they predict what movies you will like by getting to know you, so to speak. It's all a kind of machine learning, an algorithm that tries to predict the movies you will like based on the movies you've seen and maybe how you've rated those movies. Now, artificial intelligence and machine learning is improving. They are improving very rapidly. Suppose that an app were developed with a very sophisticated algorithm that could take all of the information you provided, including all of the personal data embodied in your email, your Facebook account, your online searches. All this data is available about you. And suppose you feed it into the app, and the app generates recommendations, not of what movies you will like, but of the 3 potential marriage partners who will be the best match for you anywhere in the world. And now let's suppose the algorithm is even more sophisticated than the one that recommends movies you will like. We'll call it the marriage prediction app. And it identifies 3 finalists. Here's my question. How many of you, here's my question. Would you trust the recommendations of the marriage prediction app more or than the advice of marriage partners offered by your parents? That's what I'd like to see your vote on. Now, raise the yellow sign if you would trust the app, the marriage prediction app, more than your parents, and raise the gray if you would trust your parents more than the app. I see a lot of yellow cards. I see maybe 20 or 30 gray cards. All right, who can explain why? Who will tell us? Yes.
My name is Ruby.
Yeah.
And I believe that whether you choose to believe in your parents or you choose to believe in the app, the basic essence of the prediction is a set of algorithm. And to me, I believe that the algorithm of the app would be more precise than those of my parents, depending on—
More precise?
Yes, because my parents are human, and humans are bound to predict things in the wrong direction. Yes, and that's, but I believe that is just a technical problem. It's
a technical problem of who you will marry?
What?
It's a technical problem of whom you will marry?
It's just an algorithm.
It's an algorithm.
Love is just a after effect of hormones, right?
Love, wait, let me make sure that I understand this. Love, even love, can be determined by an algorithm.
Yes. No, my idea is that even if you are to let your parents decide who you are to marry, your parent decides that person by algorithm.
So even the parent is using a kind of informal algorithm by actually relying on certain rules about whom you liked in the past, about what your tendencies are. So even the parental recommendation is based on certain rules or general principles. For example, if your parents were making a recommendation for you, what sorts of rules or principles would they implicitly be relying on?
Maybe the religious belief of the partner, or the wealth, or just the personality.
Okay, religion, wealth, personality.
Yes.
Is what your parents might have in mind when they make their recommendations.
Not my parents.
Not your parents. Why? What would they consider?
They consider that I chase my love by myself. They don't enforce their recommendation on me.
They don't enforce it, no. But here it's just a recommendation.
Yes.
So if they recommend, they will be using such things as religion, wealth.
I just put some examples.
Right, and for example, and in principle, a machine could do that better.
Yes.
In a more sophisticated. All right, who disagrees with Ruby? Yes, Don.
Hi, so I actually also said that I would choose the app over my parents, but my logic was just that the app would have a larger selection, whereas your parents know fewer people. So, but I disagree with that because I think there's a level of human interaction that is necessary because not everything is black and white. I don't think an algorithm can solve everything. I don't think an app can determine, I don't think a technological algorithm can determine human interaction more accurately than an actual human being.
Can predict, but we're talking about predicting, not determining. Why can an algorithm not, in principle, predict who will be the best partner for you?
I think there would be a way to predict, like you can pick out things that are similar. An algorithm can put things together.
Right.
But even just with what's available of your personal data online, that doesn't fully encompass your beliefs or you as a person. So there's always going to be more nuance in you as a human being than there is in the data available.
And you think your parents will be better at getting at that nuance than the app?
I think I think the app has a better selection. I don't think even I don't think my parents would know me perfectly as a human, but I think the app has
they do know you, or do not know you perfectly.
No, they do not know me perfectly.
Right.
But
would it be different? What's your name?
Savannah.
Savannah, would it be different if instead of your parents, I said your friends, your best friends?
Yes.
So there you would trust the friend more than the app.
I still think the app has I would value both, but if I could pick one over the other, and it's just, for an initial, see if it works, I think the app would have just access to a larger pool, so the chance of it working better would You would
go with the app even over the friend, never mind your parents.
I mean, I think I would realistically go with both, but I just think the app does provide a larger pool.
All right.
Numbers game.
I think that your idea, it all comes down to idea that how well the person that is predicting your partner knows about you. If your parents knows about you perfectly, they will be able to predict your future partner very precisely, I guess. If your friends knows you perfectly, they will be able to predict precisely. Am I right?
Yeah, I think there's just so much.
If a computer doesn't know you better than your parents or your best friends, couldn't they predict your future partner better than them? Because the way of how they predict whether it's a human or computer is by a set of algorithms. Computer has algorithm in electrons. We have algorithms in our neurons. And it's just the same. Yes.
It's all electrons and neurons bouncing around, and the app can better organize and know.
If suppose the computer knows you as well as your parents, couldn't they decide better?
All right, that's the issue of principle. What do you say to that?
I just find it hard to believe that the nuance of human interaction and conscience could be boiled down to numbers in an algorithm. Is what I mean, maybe some people believe that. I just find it hard.
All right, let's see if there's someone else who disagrees with what's your name again?
Ruby.
With Ruby. Someone who disagrees in principle with Ruby.
Hello, my name is Eliza. Where I disagree is the level of trust and human ability to change. So what I'm saying is if somebody comes along and they tell their parents all these things, and the parents has the ability to watch you change from baby all the way up to 24. I think that parent is gonna have a better chance than if you go with the algorithm and type everything in for only 30 seconds. that algorithm will not be able to figure out all the details of your change.
Is that just because the parent has more data, so to speak?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Now, that's the other thing. If you're saying that, oh, this algorithm has the same amount of data, yeah, okay, that's great. But then how do you collect the data?
Oh, well, but you're conceding a lot to Ruby when you say that parental understanding or knowledge of the child is just a matter of data, and the only question is whether they have more of it than the algorithm has. You're conceding quite a lot there, aren't you?
What do you think, Ruby?
Doesn't that still, I mean, you mentioned that the problem is whether the computer can collect the same amount of data as your parents. But doesn't that still come down to a technical problem?
It's a technical, that's why I say you're conceding a lot. It's a technical matter.
Okay,
which
fine,
can gather
switch my argument.
No, but is there someone, no, it's a fair point, but is there some, if it's all data and all rules, then in principle, the algorithm, the app, could aggregate more data and run the algorithm more efficiently. That's Ruby's claim. Is there anyone who wants to challenge Ruby's underlying assumption and claim that knowing a person well enough to predict their best lifelong mate is not a matter of rules or algorithms or even data, however much data might be aggregated? Is there anyone who wants to challenge that assumption?
I think it really depends on how advanced the algorithm is in deciding that. And I like to think that maybe we think we're closer to being able to make those decisions through algorithms than we maybe are. And then it also brings in mind a moral question of, does this algorithm decide who you'll be the most happy with? Does this algorithm decide who you'll make the most societal change with? So it also brings into question those kind of moral ideas.
And the parent, what's the parent deciding? Happiness or contribution to the common good?
The parents are probably deciding what they want most.
What they want most.
Or what they think you want most.
All right. I want to hear any other objection in principle to the algorithmic notion of love and knowing a person. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jia He. I want to say something about the algorithm thing, because I read somewhere in an article which says that the article basically explains why AlphaGo always win. You know, do you guys know what AlphaGo is? Yes. Okay. So, and then the writer concludes that the very reason why AlphaGo always win is because it does not have emotions. People might have emotions, and then, for example, they can be fretted, right, or while they are, during the games. But as a machine, it does not have emotions. So I have the same claim about whatever app that can predict your best partner, because even though it has the most advanced whatever.
Yes,
yeah. Okay. But it cannot tell if that person, for example, what is the temperance of that person, or if this person gets angry very easily, or is this person a good guy to be with? So these are the things that this app, no matter how much this app knows about you, they cannot tell you about the other.
And that's
right.
because, and you're suggesting that this is because of what is generally a strength of machines and algorithms, that they
it's actually its weakness.
It's its weakness in this context.
Yes.
The lack of emotion.
Right.
So the reason a machine can beat a Go champion is that it has no emotion. It just calculates.
Right. Yes.
And that quality, that emotionless quality, makes an app, even in principle, unqualified to choose my lifelong
right mate. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Because it lacks emotion or insight into human emotions, it couldn't possibly predict or understand how the couple might grow and change together, for example.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think it could?
No.
And whereas a friend, or maybe even a parent, might be blinded by certain of their emotions, but also might be given a certain kind of insight.
And also there's wisdom. Yeah.
Wisdom.
Right. I mean, for example, a friend or a parents, they can give you the wisdom that they have. Yes.
And you think that wisdom is not something that even a smart machine can have?
No.
Because you think wisdom is in part has an emotional component? What do you say to that, Ruby? That's pretty powerful.
I still think that it just comes down to a technical problem because nowadays we don't have a computer strong enough to mimic a human's emotion or a wisdom, as you might say. But in the future, there might be such a computer.
So that's in the future.
What did you say?
Sorry, that's in the future. So,
no, but I thought you were saying that future is not even possible in principle.
But we are talking about this philosophical problem in the same principle. If not, and then this problem would not exist. So in the future, it must exist.
All right, let me ask you this. Now, you're confident that in the future, in principle,
yes,
we could invent smart machines and apps so smart that they would include in their judgments wisdom, even love.
Yes.
Do you think it would be, let's suppose you're right about that for the sake of argument. Do you think that a world where machines could predict such things as wisdom and even love, would that be a better world than the one that we currently inhabit?
That is hard to say for me, but
it's hard to say.
But I would predict that.
No, but now not predicting, now judging, evaluating. Would that be a better world? A world in which machines could not only be smarter than us at Go, but also wiser than us and capable.
What do you mean by better?
Well, would you rather live in that kind of world than the one we live in now?
I may not.
You may not.
But that is me. The definition of better is quite complex and complicated. Yes,
it
is. It shouldn't be judged by me or of whether it is better or not. Because, like I said, what is better? If a world full of machines that is as good as human can produce, can result in a better efficiency of a human society. If that is better for somebody, that's better for that guy. But if I want a society that's full of human, and that is better for me. So I can really say that what is actually better. But for me, I would rather like a more humane society.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you for everyone who joined in this discussion of the marriage prediction app. This last exchange raises yet another big philosophical question. Well, what is better? And that is a difficult question. And people disagree. What is a better way to live? To answer the question in the context of smart machines is to ask, is there anything that makes human life and human wisdom and human love special, especially important? Or is it all a matter of efficiency? We can't really answer the question of better. I think Ruben is right, unless we figure out what we mean by a good life, which in a way takes us back to the suggestion with which I began. We've developed a bad habit in our public discourse, and this is true in societies around the world. We tend to shy away from engaging in public discourse with big ethical questions, questions about justice, about the common good, about what makes for a good life, questions about what makes for a better way of life. We tend to shy away from those questions, I think, for at least a couple of reasons. First, we know that in pluralist societies, people disagree. Disagree about the meaning of marriage or about how to deal with pensions or nuclear waste. People disagree about ultimate questions of the good life. And to avoid disagreement, certainly among politicians, but even among the rest of us, there's a tendency to say, let's avoid controversial questions about values in public discourse. Let's agree to disagree. And then there's also an argument we heard that reinforces that habit of avoidance, the habit of avoiding contested moral questions in politics. It's the idea of not judging. Living and letting live. We don't want to be intolerant. So even though you or I might have a certain view about this or that practice, we don't want to decide collectively how to judge or how to evaluate. Isn't it better, according to this argument, isn't it better to try to make the law as neutral as possible toward moral judgments on which we may disagree? This came up powerfully in the discussion about same-sex marriage. It came up in the discussion even about prostitution. So the impulse not to judge for fear of being intolerant, the impulse not to engage in contested arguments about the good life, to avoid controversy and disagreement, these are powerful tendencies. But I say it's a bad habit. It's a bad habit because it leads to a public discourse that is empty, that is hollow of larger moral meaning. And I think it's that emptiness that explains the dissatisfaction and the frustration with the empty terms of public discourse around the world. People want public life and public discourse to be about big things that matter. And so I think it's not possible, and it's not desirable to conduct our public life without engaging in debate about big moral questions. But what about a tolerant society? What about pluralism? Isn't this the worry? Well, it depends what you mean by mutual respect among citizens. One way of understanding mutual respect is the respect of avoidance. I'll set aside our disagreements. We won't get into them. We'll ask citizens to leave their moral and spiritual convictions outside when they enter the public square. That's one idea of mutual respect. But I think a deeper kind of mutual respect of difference comes not from avoiding, but from engaging with the competing moral and spiritual convictions our fellow citizens bring with them to public life, to engage with them, to reason together, to learn together, to disagree together. There can be a kind of civility and mutual respect, even in disagreement. We saw this in the debates, the discussions we had, where people held up sometimes the yellow sign, sometimes the gray sign. But that was the beginning, not the end of the discussion we had. And we saw how the discussions we had on particular issues led to broader questions about the meaning of a just society and the relation between ethics and law, and the meaning of freedom and free choice, and the role of the political community in shaping or refusing to shape the moral judgments of its citizens. And so what I think our discussions here illustrate is the possibility of reasoning together in public about big moral questions that matter, but doing it in a way that respects those differences, that sometimes learns from them, rather than in a way that tears us apart. My hope, my wish, my dream even for our societies is that we learn from this example, not because engaging with our moral disagreements will lead to unanimity, but instead because engaging with one another on big questions with which we may disagree, on which we may disagree with one another, will make for a better public life and will make all of us better citizens. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks so much.
今天是很好的一个这个开头哈，特别是能够了解彼此不同。这个总结我倒是觉得很值得，因为第一个，没有人会完全一样。即便是碰到同样的问题，即便你没有碰过比如电车问题啊，这个是没有人真正的有碰到这个实际的问题，但是他的反应也是叫人能够了解我们应该怎么做。每一个人的反应会不同。不会因为人的反应不同，你就觉得好像这个非我族类其心必异所以这个都是我们很值得去思考的，就是在所有公共议题上可以不同，可以有多元，可以不一样，但是在讨论的过程中，可以让彼此真正的尊重，而不是逃避。当然我们也这个尊重逃避，但是这个是不是很好的 habit 的，这是坏习惯不讨论这个。但是面对这个新的这个思考的面对21世纪， 即便大家的态度、想法、根本的一些思潮是完全不同，在这人类社会里面的话，能够彼此相合，然后往前，这个是不是以基督徒的这个角度来思考的？比如基督徒角度，我们可能都是反对同性恋的这个为主，但是，在人类社会里面的话，又是另外一个社会公民的这个原则。我觉得这个是值得让弟兄姊妹能够有不同的角度去思考，来想这个所谓的正义啊，所谓的一些不同的思潮。这些都是蛮好的这个要点的啊。好了，我想今天我发现只有这台电脑可以的话，我蛮麻烦，因为我通常都要用这个工作来做啊。那我们就只能停到这里喽啊，谢谢大家了，因为还有事情要做，那就新年快乐，